Hello, my name is Jeremy Watson. I'm the CEO of Bedrock Investment Property. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to do a deep dive on a $1.5 million property that we recently conducted a 1031 exchange for. On this property, we managed to exchange $537 a month in cash flow to over $5,600 a month in cash flow. Basically, the whole Bedrock solution. We're happy you joined us. Thank you so much. Hey, thanks for joining me today. This is Jeremy Watson, CEO of Bedrock Investment Property. I wanted to walk you all through a solution that we call the Bedrock solution. Basically, just how we try to fix people's real estate and the rental properties so that they get the right type of return. In my 10 years as in financial services, I just saw hundreds of millions of dollars of assets that were horribly underperforming. And so I founded Bedrock. And what we do, what we call the Bedrock solution, is helping people right-size their cash flow through 1031 exchanges that are conducted intelligently. Now, there's a lot of problems that come along with doing a 1031 exchange, especially on large assets, $3-4 million homes. Doing a correct 1031 exchange presents a lot of problems. And so in this webinar, I wanted to walk you through the basics of 1031 exchanges that we've done, as well as some of the pros and cons of actually doing a 1031 exchange and what it really takes to get one of these big right-size cash flow 1031 exchanges done in the first place. So the Bedrock solution is pretty straightforward. We're going to say this client's name is Maria. It's not, and I've changed all of these numbers a little bit just to protect our client's privacy. But our client bought a house in 1974 for about $72,000. Now, that originally rented for about $450 a month. And that made perfect sense back in the 70s, right? It was a good purchase. It was in a nice area, looked like it'd be up and coming, a little town called Palo Alto. So the house was a nice little house, a nice neighborhood. She was excited to have it. It was supposed to be part of her retirement plan. And come along 2019, 2020, the house was now worth $1.5 million. But it was only renting for $4,280. Now, here at Bedrock, we believe very seriously in the 1% rule, or getting 100 times your rent for your value of your asset. You'll notice in those parentheses that originally she bought the house at 161 GRM, so gross rent multipliers. That's, you take her rent, $450 a month, times 161. And that gives you the value of the asset. If you take the rent that she was getting in 2020 and multiply it by her GRM of 350, you'll notice that that's the 1.5 million. Now at Bedrock, we usually look for a GRM of about 100. Now, we're willing to look a little higher than that. We're willing to get a little off for specific things. For example, if we were looking in San Francisco or Palo Alto and it looked like a great market to invest in long term, 161 might have made good sense to us and we might have bought that house back in the day. But today, in 2020, we're really looking for a GRM of about 100 to 130 on the high side. If it's brand new construction and we're getting builder warranty, maybe we'll bump that up to 140, 145 on the max. But we really want to be as close to 100 as we can. And over the last 4,000 properties that my team has done, we've been closer to that 100 number than the 150 number 95% of the time. The only reason we'd ever get over 130 is probably for construction or something. So with her example, she bought well back in 1974. She was excited to own that property, and she now still had the property. And she said to me when we first met, "Oh, I love the property. It's doing great." Now, when we dug into it, we realized that it actually wasn't doing as great as she thought. Because when we dug into her finances and I got to know her better and I got to know what her hopes and dreams were out of this property, it became very obvious that the income she was getting from the property just wasn't giving her any of the lifestyle that she wanted. And even though the house was a nice house, and even though the tenants were decent tenants, it wasn't producing the number one thing that she needed in her life, which was good passive income. With her property, it was rented for about $4,300 a month, $4,280, like you can see on your screen. But her HOA had gone up dramatically over the last 20, 30 years. It was now about $400 a month. She had pulled out about $400,000 of mortgage on the property to put two of her kids through school, and it was really the only value she'd seen from the property is she could borrow a couple $100,000 here and there to live her life. Her property taxes were about $750 a month. Her vacancies and repair reserves was about 5%, so about 2% a month. And then her property management was about $340 a month. So when it was all said and done, her net from this $1.5 million asset, she was only earning about $537 a month. Now, what we saw when we looked at that, and we just did the simple math with her and did a return on investment calculation, just so you know, if you ever want to do a return on investment calculation, really get some professionals to look at your math and see if the house makes sense, feel free to give us a call. The number is 833-255-0055, or bedrockinvestmentproperty.com. You can hop on anytime you want and just get a hold of me or my partner or one of our team leaders. We can all run basic back of the napkin math with you. If you give us 5 numbers, we can help you understand really how a property should work, how it might not be working, and really tell you if it's even worth considering a 1031 exchange. I have every once in a while, when I see a property and we do math, every once in a while I'll say, no, don't sell it. It's great. It's in a great location. It's actually cash flowing really well. I don't think we can beat that with single family residential. So we always want you to be in a good situation. If you're in a good situation, I'm not going to be able to convince you you're not. But the truth is, if you're in a bad situation, that'll become really readily apparent. And that's where Bedrock does 90% of our business, is helping people develop better situations or get out of bad situations and get into good situations. So with that being the case, she was only earning $537 a month on this asset in 2020, $6,400 a year. That is not even enough to buy a nice used car. All right, $6,400 a year in Palo Alto, California in 2020. That's just no money at all when it comes to living a life and actually enjoying it in Northern California. And so what we did in that example is we helped her find a good realtor. We helped her vet a realtor, and we helped her 1031 out of that property. Now, the bigger question you'd have is, why doesn't she just sell? Why doesn't she just sell the property and take her money and go buy a CD? Because the truth is, she could take that money and go buy a CD at a bank and earn way better than whatever her percentage was, 0.43%. That's a joke on $1.5 million. You could earn more than that in a CD at the bank and have, virtually no risk and have it FDIC insured and all that good stuff. Truth is, you could do a lot better than 0.43% in any number of ways. So why doesn't she just sell it? Well, we got to do the math on that. And the math is a little complicated. And so the next slide, I'm trying to do the best I can, but the truth is we always have these complicated pieces. So the sales price, let's assume it's $1.5 million. And let's assume on the back end, she's the seller, and let's assume you're not in a ridiculous seller's market. Let's assume you're in a normal market. And so sellers typically pay the closing commissions. So that's going to be 3% to the buyer's agent, 3% to the seller's agent. So $90,000 in all. Let's assume on top of that, you have some closing costs for this property, another $7,500, about 0.5%. That might be on the low side, but not that low. And then let's say that she bought it for $72,500, more than 27 and a half years ago. She's depreciated her basis all the way down. She's ran her depreciation table because it was always a piece of rental property. And now her basis is effectively $18,500. Now, the reason that matters is because everything over your existing basis, when you sell your property, you're going to owe what's called recaptured depreciation. And so you might have bought it for $72,500, but if you've written down your basis on your taxes and you tell the taxman, well, it's only worth $18,750, when you sell the house for $1.5 million, you're going to owe taxes on everything over your basis. All right. So that's really important. And so that's where we end up with trying to figure out your adjusted gross basis. Now, I'm not a CPA, but I've done enough in real estate to realize that you've got to have a CPA and you've got to be able to calculate your adjusted gross basis. I did the basics here to try and give you an idea of it. So you take your basis, you add your substantial improvements to that, and then you add, any other fees that are going into that. I came up with an adjusted gross basis. I didn't spell it all out on this slide, but I came up with an adjusted gross basis of about $176,000 is what I thought she could reasonably say, hey, this is not my gain. This is my adjusted gross basis and my fees, my sales commission, substantial improvements, my original basis, my closing costs. the $176,000 is all going to go out the window in the sale. So it's never going to be a gain. And so it's not going to be a taxable gain. And so your adjusted gross basis and your fees, about 176 grand. So we say, hey, my sales price is about 1.5 million, but my adjusted gross basis and all my sales fees, those are going to be about 176 grand all in. And so that means my gain is going to be on about 1.323 million. 1.3 million of just straight up gain. Now, the way the gain is calculated as far as taxation goes, and keep in mind, I'm not a CPA, but I've seen a lot of this, and so this isn't meant to be tax advice. You're definitely going to want to talk to a CPA. We'll happily recommend you to some that we like. But the gain here is going to be a 20% long-term capital gain. Now that table starts out at 15% and it goes up to 20%, and I'm not here to get into the minutia of the capital gains tax tables, but they're based on your income, and on the majority of this she's going to be paying 20%. So I'm just going to say 20% for ease. And so you're saying your gain on this is going to be 1.323 million. So 1.32 million. All right. So with that being the case, we can just see right here. We're saying the sales price is 1.5 million minus your adjusted gross basis gives us our total gain. 20% of that is going to be effectively our tax liability on this. And so we're saying, hey, our tax liability could be as high as $492,000. Now that is pretty close to where the numbers are going to come in. The only other thing in this specific situation is she had a $400,000 mortgage, but she had taken that mortgage out along the line. And had she not taken that mortgage out, that $400,000 would have been part of her gain. She would have had a $900,000, cash put into her pocket. And so even though there's a mortgage outstanding, they're still going to calculate that as part of her gain. So what we were saying is, hey, you're going to have to pay a tax liability of about 500 grand, and you're going to have to pay off your mortgage about 500 grand. And so when we're done with this profit, we see that this $1.5 million asset is really going to boil down to about a $500,000 asset that you can do something with. That's pretty hard to swallow. It's really hard to swallow, hey, I'm a millionaire, and then you do one or two things, and all of a sudden you have $500,000. And that's really rough. And so when we did the math with this client, nothing made sense to sell the property. $500,000, if you say, well, I've got $500,000 tied up that I can't access, well, then $500 a month is about 1%. Still not great. But it's certainly not as terrible as saying I have $1.5 million tied up here. And so as we got into her math more, we realized more and more that the really only option was either to hold the property or to do a 1031 exchange. Now, a 1031 exchange is a tax code exchange. It's a structure that lets you sell your property and never realize your taxable event or never realize your taxable gain. The simple parts about it are that you need to sell your property and identify a new property to buy within 45 days. Now that can be one property or it can be 10 properties. A lot of people come to us and they say, well, I've got to buy a bigger property. That's not accurate. You can do a down exchange. You can take one $500,000 property and go buy two $250,000 properties. The bottom line is you just have to move all of the money forward and not take it out. And so we can work with 1031 exchange custodians. We work with some really, really good ones, but you just gotta comply with the strictures of the law when it comes to a 1031 exchange. And so in her example, yeah, she's, it just didn't make sense to take $510,000 at the end of the day. Now that $1.3 million, about 20% of that is federal tax, right? Your federal long-term capital gains taxes. And so she was looking at about a $264,000, $250,000 tax hit just for selling that property outright. And so it just did not make sense to us. And so what we did instead is we did a 1031 exchange to try and get her money into a better position. Now, as you can see on the screen, there's a lot of ways you can do a 1031 exchange. These are the most common ones that I've seen in my career. And I've spent about a decade in financial services. I've been investing in real estate since I was 15. I've loved real estate since I was 12 years old. And so for the last 25 years of my life, real estate's been my passion and my love. And everyone at Bedrock loves real estate. We don't hire people unless they have a passion for real estate, just because we do a lot of it. And to be perfectly candid, if we didn't like it, it would be really obnoxious. Because real estate has a lot of really obnoxious little pieces to it that if you love it, you don't mind doing it. If you hate it, you do. So the most common exit from a piece of underperforming real estate that we've seen is into a real estate investment trust. Now, a REIT, or a real estate investment trust, is basically you saying, hey, I'm going to sell my piece of real estate and I'm going to give you the money. Now, you're not taking the money, so you're giving it to them. You can do a 1031 into a REIT. The problem is when you 1031 into a REIT, the biggest REITs in the country are buying like shopping malls, right? They've got $1 or $2 billion and they're buying shopping malls or they're buying strip malls or they're developing gigantic, plazas and just big crazy things. Smaller REITs are really specialized. They're saying like, hey, we only work with dialysis centers or we only work with commercial real estate. We work with only McDonald's or, Chuck E. Cheese or whatever. So the different REITs work in different areas. I've looked at a bunch of REITs. The biggest problem I see with REITs is there's a couple. Let's say number one. Number one, you're getting into an asset class that you fundamentally don't have experience with. And I've seen more people lose money by getting into assets that they don't understand and don't have common sense backing them up, because they're just saying, okay, I'm going to give you all my money and I'm going to pray it works. Well, what if that REIT is developing shopping malls, right? And you look at that REIT and they say, oh yeah, shopping malls are going to be the future. And they just don't get into the nitty gritty that, hey, we're actually losing money because of Amazon. You have a COVID-19 situation happen. And all of a sudden, shopping malls are losing anchor tenants. You're losing a bunch of JCPenney's. And then you realize, wait a second, the leases surrounding JCPenney's anchor tenants, if you lose a certain percentage of your anchor tenants, you've got to renegotiate or, honor lower lease rates for all your other tenants. My problems with REITs are they're deploying so much money that they can't deploy it very, very carefully and minutely. Beyond that, in 2008, when real estate really got really burned, most REITs, I'd say, are private REITs. They're REITs where you're just giving your money to some company and they're going out investing in real estate. And you can do a 1031 into a REIT. But the biggest problem is that if it's a private REIT, there's no public market to resell those shares. And they say, oh, you can just surrender those shares back to us and we'll sell them to someone else at value. But in 2008, those private REITs actually surrendered their redemption options. They said, you can't redeem those shares. We can't buy those back from you right now because, of course, everything was in the toilet and their values were all down and it just didn't work for them. So instead of just paying people back or instead of putting themselves in a bad situation, they completely surrendered those redemption options. And almost everyone I know from a decade of financial services who owned a REIT got bloodied. Now, the positive side of a REIT is you've got really good economies of scale. You've got a lot of good things going on where if you've got a professional team and they're taking care of everything, you can just turn over your money and then you just get paid a return. You get a guaranteed 4 or 5 or 6% based on the value of your shares. And then you might be able to sell your shares down the line if the property does really, really well. The biggest problem I see with a REIT is that if things go wrong, which they do, and if they go wrong, you end up having to sue the REIT, and they end up defending themselves with your own money until your own money is basically gone. And so to get out of a REIT any other way than just selling those shares on a market where the shares are accepted or redeeming your shares if the redemption option doesn't get surrendered, it's really hard to get out of a REIT. And if it goes bad, it goes very, very bad. And for that, most REITs are Reg D products if they're not publicly traded REITs. And if they're publicly traded REITs, we just see they have much lower returns typically. And so there's just a lot of really complicated stuff getting into a REIT. But that's one of the main pitches you're going to hear if you're looking at a 1031 exchange. It's just, oh, we got this real estate investment trust. We're great. We're geniuses. We've never made a mistake. And to be perfectly candid, I'm as bright as any, and we still make mistakes. So with that being the case, real estate investment trust, I just didn't like that option for my clients while I was in financial services. The second option is a syndication. We see those all the time. Now, a syndication is the pitch typically sounds like, hey, we're going to have you come in with us on an investment. We're buying a 400 unit complex in Dallas, Texas. It's in rough shape. We're going to go in, we're going to get a mortgage on it, and then we're going to flip it. And we're going to get all the units, we're going to fix them up, we're going to bring the rent up to market level, and then we're going to sell it in 5 to 7 years, and we'll all make a killing. Now, the truth is, right now, the numbers are really, really attractive there. I like syndications a lot. I met with a lot of syndications houses before I started Bedrock. I don't mind the product. Again, my problem with them is that you're getting involved in financial transaction that you just don't have any basis in yourself. You're just taking someone's word for it. And unfortunately, as soon as you're taking 100% someone else's word for it, you don't have your own common sense backing you up. You're just taking someone's word for it. Unfortunately, with syndications, and the reason they're Reg D products that are only really available to accredited investors, people who have over $1 million of their own net worth outside of their primary residence, the reason that syndications fall under that Reg D is because they're going to commingle your funds with a bunch of other people's funds. And again, if it all goes to crap, let's say you get into a rehab on these properties and you didn't define your scope of work quite well enough, and all of a sudden you realize it's going to cost you 20, 30, 40% more, you blow through your reserves, and all of a sudden you've got real problems with the syndication. Well, then who's going to put up more money? Maybe you do a capital call, and most people aren't down to put in more money to this syndication, and you don't get the rehab done on time, and all of a sudden you're really burning through capital. You're at lower occupancy rates than you projected, and you're really having trouble getting the property completed. You're not being able to raise enough capital to get the property completed. When a syndication goes wrong, it goes very, very wrong, because when you open up a wall, you never know what you're going to find. And unluckily, finding a black mold in a 450 unit complex could lead to a 450 unit black mold remediation, which can be just disastrous. And so most people who are considering a big 1031 are considering one of these two main options. Hey, I'm just going to do a REIT, or hey, I'm going to do a syndication. The problem with both of those fundamentally is if it goes wrong, it will go very, very wrong. And you've given up all of the control over your asset that you used to have. Hey, you used to have one house that was in Palo Alto. It was a little asset. You understood your asset. You knew what you were getting into. You knew that there was really very little chance you'd ever lose everything. And we're 1031ing into a completely different animal. I would say the difference between a single family residential rental and a 1031 or like a syndication is the difference between a kitten and a tiger. All right. They're very different cats. All right, they're still both cats. They have some of the same DNA, but one is a kitten and one's a tiger. And if you're not careful, one can tear your face off, where the other one is pretty much what you expected getting in. You know, it's got like one income stream and 5 expenses. And so we are really careful when we're talking about what your risks are. I like single-family residential because all of my clients understand the basics of single-family residential. What we like at Bedrock is if we do a bad enough job, you can let us go. No lawsuit required. All right. If we do a bad enough job, you can let us go. You can sell the house, go get a realtor like you typically would, or you can have a property manager manage. You deal directly with property manager. Sure, there's some compliance stuff that we do: LLC setup, administrative, accounting, tax prep, all that stuff. But the truth is, all of that you can figure out. What no one can figure out when a REIT goes bad is, okay, this person that was said they were the genius of all geniuses who talked me into getting this REIT, well, they're gone now. And now we've got this enormous, this shopping mall that was under development, and none of us really have experience in developing shopping malls. And so there's almost no way to pull out of that situation gracefully without losing a lot of money. The last thing we see a lot of the time is partnering with a pro. All right, I see this all the time on YouTube. Holy cow! You just see unfortunately, some ego monster talking about how they have all this money and they're just such an ego monster, and talking about how, they've got millions of dollars and they do millions of deals and tens of millions of dollars. I just cannot even tell you how sick of that pitch I am. We've done over 4,000 properties over the last decade. My team is as bright as anyone in the industry. They're great men. We've got great people on the team. But the truth is, most of the other pitch is partner with a pro. You bring your money and your credit, and we'll bring our incredible experience and talent, and there's no way it can be wrong. And the reason people present themselves as these ego monsters, as it looks like they're infallible. All right, they present this air of they've never made a mistake and they're never going to make a mistake, and that's just simply not true. As I said, our team's as bright as anyone, and we still make mistakes. We try to own up to them when we make them, but the truth is we try to be humble with ourselves and say, hey, we are humans, you are humans, let's all approach this as humans. Partnering with a pro is my least favorite of all of this. because usually that pro is going to want 40-50% of the pie. And usually, again, when it all goes to garbage, you're going to realize that they didn't have any systems in place. You bought all on this kind of ego and their ability to convince you that they could do no wrong. And then when they do wrong, they're again going to end up fighting you with your own money to get your money back. And it just goes to garbage very quickly. What I liked was just buying properties where the numbers make more sense. Let's not change the class of investment we're doing. Let's not go from single family to mini malls. All right. Let's not go from single family to strip malls. Let's just instead find some markets where the numbers fundamentally make more sense. We may have to go out of our market. We don't have to go out of our comfort zone. Because if we just go out of our market, because there are places in the U.S. right now where the numbers make really good common sense, where any investor would look and say, hey, that's a great place for me to put my money. And so really the 1031 that I was interested in when I founded Bedrock was, how do we just go buy properties where the numbers fundamentally make more sense? And so here's the way that we look at those numbers. So we did a 1031 exchange on this $1.5 million asset. What we did is we bought 3 properties in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay, you can see right there, Black Bear Lane, Lost Grove Lane, Britton Grove Lane. This is all in the same 1031 exchange. So we got those 3 properties on board. Net rents are a little different in each place. Each place is going to have a little bit different, property taxes, because some are in the city and some are in the county. Some of those have HOAs involved and some of them don't have HOAs involved. And the numbers are always going to be a little bit different, but the gross rent's the same. And then the net rent was just a little bit different on each of those properties. We also went and bought 2 properties that were brand new down in Florida, in Orlando, and I think one was in Orlando, 2 were in Orlando, and one of those might have actually been in Northport. So we bought 2 properties in Orlando, Florida, and then we bought 2 properties that were brand new builds in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now we worked directly with the builder on those, but when we got all those properties, again, we got 7 properties in all, 2 in Charlotte, 2 in Florida, and then 3 in Memphis, Tennessee. When it was all said and done, we took the same property that was rented for $4,200, and we were able to take that property that had only been yielding the owner $537 a month and 60 cents. What a joke. Less than 0.5%. And what we were able to do is we were able to convert that into 7 properties. That when you add up those net returns after all expenses, you'll notice that this client is now earning $5,664.58. So before Bedrock, $537.60. After Bedrock, $5,664.58. Now that is only the beginning of the story, because before Bedrock they said 5% for vacancies, and we looked at the math and that reserve just wasn't really happening. And so after Bedrock we have 10% for vacancies and repairs, because we know those things do happen and will happen. And so we just said, hey, let's go ahead and take 10% off the top line and make sure there's enough money in the reserves for repairs. Number 2, professional property management. As we dug into this client's property management situation, she was paying about half price for a friend to look in on the property. But as we looked at the property, we realized that it just wasn't being done. She was kind of paying half price for a buddy to give her a deal, and just nothing was being done. It had been not done for long enough that it just no one was accountable. I remember in college, I took my car once to my brother's friend's shop. And he's like, oh yeah, he'll give you the family rate. And weeks went by without my car having brakes done, a simple job. And there was really no way I could hold him accountable to that work, because he was giving me the family rate. He was giving me the friend's rate. And he was just, he wasn't earning money on my job. And so I realized right then and there, I'm willing to pay if I can have someone be accountable. That's what I really wanted, was someone to be accountable that I could really work with, who would be professional, who would get things done in a timely manner. In this case, she didn't have really accountable property management, which she now has. So she now has property managers, 3 property managers. Bedrock deals with those in 3 states. And so we oversee the property management on a month by month basis. Number 3, she now has professional business management. When it comes to setting up an LLC or an LLC in 3 different states and keeping those in compliance, when it comes to their annual filings and keeping annual minutes for those LLCs and making sure that the bank accounts are set up correctly and making sure that those bank accounts records are correct and that we have tax ready documents, our tax preps, and getting your K1s ready and recommending an accountant if you need an accountant, or digging into any of the math if you need to, or if problems occur with your property management, having someone there who can deal with the property management and open a ticket and has a relationship that they can work with the property management and set realistic expectations on what needs to be done and what type of resolution would make sense. Or a company that has good relationships with the company you bought. 2 of these were new builds. Now, neither of those have had problems in the last year. However, they are new builds, and we bought 10 or 11 properties just like these 2, and we had some issues. We had a sewer get torn up on one of them. We had some trees die on another one of them. We had a garage door opener die on one of them, and we had to go back to the builder and get builder warranty involved. In some of those examples, the builder said they weren't going to cover warranty, so we had to get a little stern, and we managed to get all of those covered. Again, professional business management is all that stuff. Accounting, administrative, property manager setup, property manager oversight, LLC setup and compliance, and just advice along the way. If you want to say, hey, why, how much money do I need to keep in reserves? All of that is what Bedrock Property Administration does. And so we offer that service to kind of oversee the properties that we help our clients to buy. And so beyond that, we're talking about all of the reserves that need to be in place. Now, you're never going to buy a property with Bedrock without putting $5,000 in upfront pre-funded reserves, because we know from experience that properties have problems. And we just say, okay, if properties have problems, what's the biggest problem you can see out of the gate? And it's going to be losing an air conditioner in the middle of the summer. Well, on the size houses that we're buying, what type of expenses in AC in the middle of summer, maximum we see is about $5,000. And so we say, okay, let's just put that much money aside for a rainy day. And then on top of that, let's put 10% of gross rents on top of that. And we'll always make sure there's enough money in reserves. And so on top of everything else that we were doing, she's now got vacancies and repairs reserving on a monthly basis. She's now got professional property management. She's now got professional business management and LLC set up in compliance on top of that. She's now got accounting and tax prep done. And she now has about $35,000 of reserves just sitting in account, that we're setting there from the 1031. And so what she's got now is all of these pieces of the puzzle that are so much safer than what she had beforehand, when she was only earning $537 a month. And even after all of those things that we've done to protect her assets and make sure there's enough money in reserves and make sure that she's got good property management, make sure those property managers are being overseen by a professional business management company, even after all of that, that's where her net comes in of $5,664 a month. Even after all of that, we've still 10 times her income. Now, the truth is, if we had been just trying to cook the books and make a higher return, yeah, we could have made it look like a much higher return, but we're after a very realistic return, something we can live with year in and year out. Because on this client situation, we are going to be working with her for the next 5 to 7 years until she sells these properties in 1031s into the next set of properties, which is probably going to take her 7 properties, and we're going to 1031 that into 12 or 14 properties. And with that being the case, we want a good relationship, so she could just 1031 with us, and we'll just make the same thing happen again for her. Now, the biggest problem is the actual 1031, when you're talking about single-family residential, can be enormously difficult. Okay? The reason for that is, well, how do you find 3 properties in Memphis, Tennessee within the 45-day identification period? How do you find 2 properties in Orlando, Florida within the 45-day identification period? How do you find 2 properties in Charlotte, North Carolina within the 45-day identification period? And how do you go about both closing your property and then turning around and buying $1.5 million of single-family residential that you're comfortable buying within the 180 days to close period of a 1031 exchange? If this is all sounding like Greek, on our site, www.bedrockinvestmentproperty.com. My partner Anthony Andelin did a 16-minute video where he walked through kind of the intimacies, the nuts and bolts of a 1031 exchange. But the truth is, a typical owner could never do what we did with this owner because it just takes too much identification. You have to find too many properties that work within a well enough for you to be happy with, and you have to do all of the diligence on all of those properties and still close within 180 days. It's almost impossible for a single investor to do, especially if you've got a day job or if you're doing anything else with your time. So in this case, we were able to help her get her whole portfolio changed over, identify her 7 properties. We were able to help her line up lending when she needed to not screw up her boot calculations, her 1031 calculations. We were able to find hard money when she needed it for some really specific reasons. And we were able to help her kind of navigate through all of the difficulties of this process in order to get her return 10 times higher. Now, it didn't just happen. It was a lot of work, and it took about a quarter, and it took a lot of my team's time. But when we finished, we had 7 really good, solid performing cash flow pieces of single family residential real estate, and we had 10 times her income, because all we did was we found real estate that just had a fundamentally better return than where she was already investing. And we were able to eliminate a lot of expenses based on where she was already investing, and we were able to get a much higher return and just really juice up her return. Now, anyone who saw the smaller video of this might say, well, $10,000, you said it was a $1.5 million asset. $10,000 isn't a 1% return. That's true, and it's not. Unfortunately, she had a $400,000 loan outstanding on this property. And if you really looked at it on a $1.5 million asset, she really only had about $1 million of equity, a little less than that. And so the fact that we got $10,000 a month of rent on a little less than $1 million of equity means we were right on the money in what our expectations were. And so any eagle-eyed people who picked that out, good job. But yeah, we were very careful about that. The $400,000 mortgage had to get paid off still. Actually, it had to get exchanged for equal debt under the 1031 guidelines. So that's where it came down for us having to find a hard money lender. I'll go ahead and include that in this story. So when we got down to our final 4 properties, we had to exchange and move that debt over. The problem is she was only earning $537 a month off this property. She was actually earning so little off this property that she had not filed taxes in 6 or 7 years. She had just taken the standard deduction and called it. Because she just didn't have enough money to report, really. And when that's the case, she couldn't go into a bank and get financed for her financing to replace her $400,000 worth of loan. And if you don't replace the mortgage amount, it'll mess up your boot calculation, and you'll be in a bunch of hot water. And so we actually had to go out to our lending team and find a lender who could help us with that specific situation. We actually ended up with hard money for a little while to make all of this work and be able to move over all of the lending. And so that is yet another piece of the equation that would be almost impossible to do as a single owner of a single piece of real estate that you bought back in the 70s. You really need to have an intelligent team who can answer all of these question marks when these question marks pop up. So the fundamental thing we do at Bedrock is we just buy where the numbers make sense. We're not magic. We're not fundamentally smarter or brighter or more brilliant or more egotistical than the next. We try to be less egotistical than the next. But the truth is, we just try to buy where the numbers make sense. And the fundamental thing we're looking for is our gross rent multipliers. We're looking for to buy between 100 and 130 times rent, right? So if we got a rent of $1,500, multiply that by 100, we would look for a purchase price roughly $150,000. That's the type of asset we're looking for. Now, the truth is, we'll go a little higher than that, but we'll go up to 130 or even 140, 145 on a brand new build with good warranties on it and with a builder we respect and have worked with in the past. But the truth is, 150, 100 times rent is really hard to get. The next thing we do is we keep the type of properties we buy really specific. Okay, so in the last decade, my team has bought over 4,000 homes under 130 GRM. But the reason we can do that, and the reason we've had such success at doing that, is because we've bought the same thing over and over and over. Okay, we're always buying the same exact type of houses. They're always going to be between 1,200 and 2,400 square feet. They're always going to be 1980s or newer. They're always going to be 3-bedroom, 4-bath, or 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garages. We're usually buying between $130,000 to $225,000. We're wanting more than 5.5% cash flow in the neighborhoods we're in. Now, we want nice neighborhoods where you'd feel safe walking on the street with your kids, entry middle class neighborhoods, because we want the greatest cross section of renters, the most renters humanly possible, and the most first time home buyers humanly possible looking at the same houses. And so that's what we've really bought, is we've just bought that same house 4,000 plus times over the past decade. Now, my team is very, very experienced in this. I would say I have some of the most experienced people in the world when it comes to buying single-family residential property. But one of the reasons that has worked is because we just buy the same thing over and over. Now let's look at some examples of where the numbers might make sense and where the examples might not make sense. This is just a quick snapshot of Zillow. And the green dot on the page is this house. Now it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in San Mateo, California. We're there all the time for business. I do a lot of business out of San Francisco. And San Mateo, California is 1,100 square feet. Nice house. Been recently redone, maybe the early 2000s, late 90s at the latest. But it's a nice house. $4,300 a month is what they're asking for their rent. And so if we take that number and we apply a gross rent multiplier of 100, we're expecting to say, hey, $4,300 a month, we would want to buy that house for effectively $430,000. 4,300 times 100. $430,000 would be our effective purchase price. That would make it a good deal for us, right? We'd feel like that's a great deal. So again, our strike price there, $430,000. But when we look on Zillow, and keep in mind, I know Zillow's not the grand poobah of all things economic, but the truth is, sorry, that's a Southern quote. I know it's not the greatest value estimator of all things. I actually know Zillow has a ton of problems, but the truth is we're using Zillow because it's a ton of problems that are all fairly constant. And so what would we say this property is roughly worth? So $4,300 a month times 100 should be $430,000. Well, this property on Zillow is right now estimated at about $1.4 million. Now that means that the gross rent multiplier on that property is about $338. Keep in mind, I'm buying exclusively between about 100 to 130. 330 means that property is 3 times too expensive to meet Bedrock's metrics. Moreover, it means that I'm finding properties, 4,000 plus of them over the last decade, that do meet those metrics. And so there are properties in the market that meet those metrics of saying, hey, 100 times rent, 120, 130 times rent, we'll buy it. Because that puts you in a really good position to perform the way you're hoping. So 1.4 million, that's a joke. With 1.4 million, you should turn around on that asset. You should go buy 7 properties for cash for $200,000 a piece. Those 7 properties should rent for roughly $1,600 a piece, $1,700, $1,800 a piece, and you should end up with instead of $4,300 of rent for 1.5 million. Holy cow! You should be really closer to $15,000 a month, not $4,300 a month. But again, it takes all the little pieces of the 1031. You got to be able to sell the property with an agent who you trust. We have great agents we love in almost every market. If we're using them, they've never let us down. Beyond that, we have the ability to go and identify properties within that 1031 timetable. The ability to find a property that you might actually close on within 45 days of sale is really important. And what we do is we front load it. We start looking for properties as soon as you're under contract, so that we're able to put those under, identify those and start getting through those properties and doing our diligence on those properties, so that if there is a problem, we still have time to fix it within the 45-day identification period. Again, it's just virtually impossible to do all of that work alone without a team. My team's fantastic. They've done it more times than just about anyone, and so we'd be happy to help. So with that being the case, 1.4 million, that's a joke. So let's look at Memphis, Tennessee. That little green dot on your screen is just a house we picked again on Zillow. Again, I know it's not perfect, but everything is imperfect. And so we're just using an imperfect ruler to try and give a basic idea here. So with that being the case, looking at that tiny little property up near Cordova, Tennessee. Oh, it is in Cordova. That property is rented for $1,515 a month. So with that being the case, $1,515. If we're looking for a GRM of 100, that means we'd want to buy that property for about $151,000. 1,515 times 100. We'd want to buy that property for about $151,000. Zillow says that property cost about $148,000. Fortunately for everyone on this call, it's not rocket science. The truth is, we just need to find a market where the numbers fundamentally make better sense. And there are several markets that we work in very heavily. San Francisco, Seattle, LA, where the values have just ran away from the rents. And all of a sudden we have these clients who are millionaires who are living on rice and beans because their properties just are not cash flowing well enough. In another video, I'll walk you through the reverse rental, which is what I like right now in the market because I love Northern California. I would rent in Northern California, Santa Cruz, Danville. I'd rent there in a heartbeat and live there, but I wouldn't buy there just because of how bad the numbers are there right now. So I'll walk through another video, the rental reverse exchange that we call it. We love the idea of not keeping all your money tied up in property, but having good cash flow property and then renting where you want to live if the rentals don't make sense where you want to live. So with that being the case, $148,000 is rough price for this house. Again, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,600 square foot, very similar house, just in a better market. And so we've got that, and we just look for those properties all over the place. Again, in the last decade, our team has bought over 4,000 of these properties. I'm just putting up on the screen some of the pictures. We take a picture of every single house as part of our pro formas. But some of the pictures of some of the houses that we've gotten, you'll notice the same thing on every single house. They're all these 1,200 to 2,400 square feet houses, 1980s or newer, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 4-bedroom, 2-bath houses, nice brick exteriors, usually 2-car garages, very seldom carports, very seldom on-street parking. Most of these houses you would be thrilled to have in your portfolio. And if you've got a nice house in a nice neighborhood in a nice state that's landlord friendly, you can end up with some great assets in your portfolio. And that's what we've done. We've done that over 4,000 times in a decade. These are some of the houses. That house is one of the ones that we did in the webinar. That house is one of the ones we did in the webinar. And so we're always looking for great houses. We're always looking to add to that portfolio. And so with that being the case, here's the solution that we want. If you were to go out and try to do what Bedrock does, you'd have to build a whole network in the markets. You'd have to find realtors and brokers. You'd have to find bird doggers. You'd have to go hire someone to go knock doors. We have people at the foreclosure auctions. We have rehab teams in place. If you were going to go and try to recreate what we do, it'd be virtually impossible. But it's very, very easy for us just to buy one more house in the same markets where we already do all that work. In this example, it'd be virtually impossible to diversify your portfolio and go buy houses in 3 different markets and understand those markets well enough to feel confident in buying. Thing is, my team's already bought a couple hundred houses in each of these markets. We already have property management relationships in each of these markets. We already have really functioning businesses in each of these markets. And so adding one more property, or even 2 or 3 per market, even a big 1031 exchange where you say, okay, I'm going to have to buy 20 houses. That's not the end of the road for us because it's just a couple more houses per market. We just let our teams know, hey, we need this many. And then we have 45 days to go find those houses. Truth is, we can usually find houses within a week or 2. And we can usually have those houses really, really well vetted within, 2 or 3 weeks. So 45 days is definitely enough time to do a 1031 exchange when you have a big, helpful team. When it's just you by yourself, it can be very overwhelming. So again, you want to just feel free to give us a call. Our number is 833-255-0055 or visit our website and get to know us a little better at www.bedrockinvestmentproperty. Okay. So the people we help the most in Bedrock is big, complicated 1031s. It seems to be where people just realize that there's enormous amounts of value because it's almost impossible to do that alone, but they love the business management contract that we offer. It's very, very fair to our owners. Basically, we don't get paid unless the properties perform as advertised. That's as fair as we can make it. So with that being the case, we help with a lot of big, complicated 1031s. We're doing those all day, every day. But beyond that, it's pretty easy to just buy a first-time rental property. Just because we're used to buying 10 and 12 at a time doesn't mean we can't buy one. And we're happy to buy one. We're happy to work with people who are new or seasoned investors who just don't have a ton of properties, but they've always wanted to have some properties. We're happy to work with you and help you build your portfolio. Or if you have really good portfolio building already, but you just say to yourself, hey, I think that Bedrock may have a better solution on how to get a better return while maintaining control over my assets. We work with a lot of seasoned investors who have 2 or 3 or 4 million. We work with a lot of people who have REITs who want to get out of their REITs. If you can get a 1031 to work getting out, that's usually a huge problem. But if you can get out of your REIT with a 1031, we can get into single-family residential with 1031. Syndications, usually you can't come out of them in a 1031 because you're invested alongside a bunch of other people, and it just doesn't usually work out that way. So syndications usually have to pay your taxes. But if you can manage to get out of that in a 1031 position, we can 1031 into single-family residential. What another beautiful thing about single-family residential is you can sell those properties one at a time. If you ever need to liquidate some cash, you can sell one of your 7 or 10 properties. You don't have to sell your whole syndication. You can refinance those properties and pull out cash from one at a time. Instead of going and refinancing your whole 450 unit syndication that you don't have any, you own a small fraction of and other people own, you can't get loans on that because there's all these other people. No, single family residential, you own it outright. Go get a cash out refi on it. Go get a line of credit on it. We did EIDL financing, or economic income disaster loans, on almost all of ours when the COVID-19 pandemic hit as part of our business management services. We realized there were going to be losses. We didn't know where those losses were going to incur. So we went ahead and applied day one for EIDL in case we needed it. None of our clients would have been, maybe some of them would have been that on the ball, but almost no one's that on the ball. With Bedrock and with our size, we said, hey, this might be something that's necessary to do. It was first come, first served basis, and we saved our clients tens of thousands of dollars of losses by just being on the ball and professionals. So with that being the case, we're happy to help first-time buyers of residential real estate. We're happy to work with seasoned investors who just want to grow their portfolio and maybe grow their portfolio a bit better, a bit more passively. And we love helping with 1031 clients, people who have a property that are super underperforming. I wouldn't say every property is going to be a 1,000% plus return, but we've seen dozens where we 5, 6, 7 times their returns because it doesn't take that much. Truthfully, Bedrock works in a beautiful place where we're solving a problem where properties are just not performing properly to begin with. And it's hard to find a solution to get those properties to perform correctly. But when we have a good solution where we know we can go buy properties that do perform correctly, then we're going to have a much better chance of double, tripling, quadrupling, quintupling that return. And it's not that hard because when you start from 0.43%, it's not that hard to 10 times that. We only had to take that client to a 5% cash on cash return. And that's what we did. We took her to a nice, solid 5% return, got our cash flow working properly, and we were able to help her enormously. An entire income was created out of that one 1031 exchange. Thank you so much for joining us for that presentation. I hope it was useful. I hope you learned a lot, and feel free to give us a call at any time. The best number to get us is at 833-255-0055. We do have that number staffed 24 hours a day because candidly, we always get property manager phone calls or tenant phone calls or owner phone calls. So feel free to call us and we'll get something scheduled with one of our experts. Thank you so much. Feel free to also visit us at www.bedrockinvestmentproperty.com. That's all singular, bedrockinvestmentproperty.com. Or like and subscribe down below so you can see more content coming out in the future. Thank you again for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.